Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Trinity Korth. I'm the Solutions Advisor for the Center for Professional and Executive Development, CPED. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Demystifying Artificial Intelligence in the Business. As a quick reminder, if you have any questions you'd like to ask during today's webinar, you can submit those in the chat box. We will answer any questions that come up at the end of our webinar today during the Q&A section. Today's webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to you via email within the next few days. Today's webinar is sponsored by the Center for Professional Executive Development. CPED offers online and in-person programs and certifications that will give you the modern, relevant skills needed to advance your career. All of our programs offer interactive life learning sessions facilitated by instructors with practical business experience. CPED also partners with organizations to provide customized professional development programs, coaching, and consulting. For more information on the Center for Professional and Executive Development, please visit our website at uwcped.org. Now, I'd like to introduce you to today's facilitators, Daniel Bauer and Justin Sydnor. Dr. Daniel Bauer is a professor at the Wisconsin School of Business. He is the academic director of the school's Master's in Business Analytics program and teaches courses in machine learning and predictive modeling within that program. Dr. Justin Sydnor is also a professor at the Wisconsin School of Business. His expertise is in behavioral economics, and he teaches courses within the business analytics program on experiments and causal methods, as well as decision-making under uncertainty. Thank you guys so much for coming and producing this webinar with us today, and I'll hand it on over to you.
Great. Well, thank you everybody who's in attendance today. We're really happy to get to spend half an hour with you, even though it feels a little far away from you, not being able to see all your faces. But Danny, my colleague here, and I wanted to put together this webinar to give a sense of what's going on as we see it in the business community around artificial intelligence. And just as a quick thing, if you're already engaged in artificial intelligence, and we're going to have a little bit of a poll here in a minute, this may not be the webinar for you. In putting this together, what we really want to do is speak to those who have heard this term AI and artificial intelligence and are trying to understand a little bit better how might this be relevant in the places they work, and what does that even really mean, and where's it going in business. So that's kind of the level we're going for today. And I think a helpful thing is to just start, well, why would we even be doing a webinar like this now? And what's the purpose of this? And I think a helpful thing is to think about what's happened over the last 20 to 30 years in the nature of sort of power and money in the economy. So this is a chart that shows the 5 highest market cap companies as of 1995 and 2021. And what you'll see if you compare these two lists is that there's just been this dramatic shift. In 1995, the largest companies were manufacturing companies, typically making physical products or delivering very sort of physical services. As of 2021, most of the dominant market caps are for companies whose primary business in some sense can be thought of as business in data. They tend to involve a lot of web-based and technology applications, but also they monetize and make a lot of their money through information and through data. And we think that's probably the most important sort of background to think about for all of your industries. So many of you may be in industries that aren't at the forefront of tech, Apple and Google. But what we've seen sort of across the economy is a confluence of really 3 developments that are changing the landscape of business more broadly. So on the one hand, we have a rise of digital technology. The vast majority of interactions now in business come through some sort of digital platform, whether that's email and web traffic, or the use of smartphones and text data, or cameras and satellites. Everything is digital. And all of that digital technology creates data. It creates an information stream, or what some people sometimes refer to as sort of the digital breadcrumbs of the modern economy. Things are recorded, and potentially on pretty massive scale now. Now, as all of that data is becoming recorded, as more and more of our interactions are things that are sort of saved for prosperity in digital devices, it then has merged with a real rise over the last 3 decades of computing and data analytics power. There's now a lot more ability to harness data and do something with it if you can ask the right questions and if your business can sort of formulate a plan for how to utilize data. There's an amazing array of tools. And we think of that digital transformation, what we think of as kind of the digital transformation throughout the economy, as being the confluence of these three things happening together. So before we get started too far, we would like to get a rough sense of where everybody who's with us here today is coming from. So our friend Brooke here at CPED is going to launch a poll, and we just want you to let us know, how comfortable are you with the terms machine learning and artificial intelligence, where A is you really don't know what that means, B to C is you have some sense, and D is you think you could actually kind of explain it pretty well in terms to others. Brooke will show us all the results here in a second. It's our one ability to get a sense of really who's here with us today. All right. So it looks like, most of the crowd here is in this kind of B to C range. And what I would say is, and there's a few of you who are in the A range. I would say definitely we're going to try to, in the next 20 minutes or so, have some decent content for those of you who are in that kind of A to B range for sure, and hopefully useful for C. Some of you who are in the D range, this may or may not be totally on point for you. So if you end up dropping off and want to hit us up for a deeper discussion at some point, we definitely will not be offended by that. Um, but so what we want to do is spend a little time talking through the landscape of business analytics as we see it. And this is informed a lot by the structure of a master's program in business analytics that we have here at the Wisconsin School of Business, and that my colleague who's going to jump in here in a minute, Danny Bauer, is the academic director for. But we think it's somewhat useful to think about the ways in which businesses are using this rise of data and analytics power. And I would say one big way in which it's being used is a rise of access to information, often through cloud-based technologies. And you'll see this in terms of things like dashboards. And many of us, even if our organizations aren't yet rich with this sort of access to information, have experience with it, for instance, through things like COVID dashboards. And I've got a picture of one from the Dane County here where Madison is. These sort of information platforms have really risen in recent years as more and more information can be stored efficiently in cloud-based systems and provided to people through analytics software in ways that allow them to analyze data in real time. So they update as you go and allow you to make decisions that are adapting to changes in information, and also allow people to make drill downs and sort of understand things at a finer level. So we think there is a big movement towards what we would call that kind of understanding and insights piece within business. And a lot of people are sort of becoming more data driven in their decision making from that part. And our business analytics program touches on a lot of that. A second version of where we think there's a big movement in analytics is what we would call process automation. So a couple of examples here, for instance, recently I was looking into getting COVID booster shot. And if you go to the Walgreens website, for instance, for that, they now have a very automated system where you yourself can go on and check through the various appointment times and check off a couple of boxes and make your appointment. And that has really replaced a person who might otherwise have had to do those same steps for you. They might have checked a calendar for you and booked you, but now all of that can be done more seamlessly and quickly. Similarly, we've worked with a number of auto insurers, and in the auto insurance landscape, what you're starting to see is that rather than needing to send out a claims adjuster after there's an accident and have that adjuster go and take pictures of a vehicle and document damage, that now that sort of thing can be semi-automated by allowing people to do it themselves on their cell phones. And all that process automation basically looks like there was a routine process, often done by a person, And that process can now get coded into a computer and gets done more seamlessly and with less person time to make things more efficient. But the last category is what we would refer to in very broad terms. And my partner Danny here is going to hop in a second and talk a little bit more about what do we really mean by artificial intelligence. But there are things people refer to as artificial intelligence or AI. And we think it's helpful to think about these examples as largely being about prediction models. That behind the scenes, in a range of businesses now, people are developing models that are based on algorithms that take historical data and make predictions. And those predictions are used for a wide range of things. A couple of easy examples that most people would be familiar with would be, for instance, Netflix and any other of those sort of online platforms for media consumption that almost always are customized to try to show you things that you're likely to want to watch. Okay, so they'll quickly show you things that maybe you have started watching or things related to what you've watched. There's a lot of predictions going on to try to make it so that within 20 seconds or so, when you click that button for Netflix, you can find what you want to watch. And your version of Netflix looks different than my version of Netflix. And that is sort of a customization that's becoming more and more apparent. People are also more familiar with this with things like Alexa. There's an increasing use of what we would think of as non-structured data. You can speak to a computer, or you can write an open-ended email or a text stream, and the computer can make a prediction of what information might be useful for you coming out of that. So Alexa, you can ask Alexa to play a song. Alexa interprets your voice and says it seems like Alexa makes a prediction that it seems like you want to hear this song on Spotify. And so Alexa does it. And for anybody who's ever had an Alexa device, it's not perfect. And sometimes you'll be frustrated. My daughter spent the morning screaming at Alexa to play the song she wanted. The last example I have here is, I would say, kind of more at the very forefront. And we wanted to highlight this largely because there are some real rapid advances happening in this space of artificial intelligence. And this is an example called DALL-E 2. If you haven't heard of this before, it'd be a really interesting thing after the webinar to think about Googling. What DALL-E does is it takes in text prompts and generates artwork, generates images based on text prompts. Okay, so these are creative images generated by a computer based on a prompt given to it by the user. And it will generate some really fantastical and very interesting prompts or artwork. And so this is a prompt of like a rabbit reading a newspaper in a Victorian style or something like that. And if you Google this, it's really interesting. And what's different about DALL-E relative to some of these other things that's worth knowing is that these AI things are starting to bleed into some areas that we might have thought of traditionally as being mostly about human creativity. Some things around artwork and the generation of text and passages, sort of like write a speech on this topic. Computers are starting to be trained to kind of match patterns and give predictions of what would be interesting or sort of attractive to people, and can now create new things, not just reflect the past, but do some new creation. For the most part, though, that type of thing, this DALL-E stuff, is beyond where most businesses are in terms of the possible uses of AI. Most of our experience in business suggests that AI, as it's being used in business right now, is still at mostly the foundational levels. And that even Netflix, in making a prediction of that type, that customization, is beyond where much of it is. So we'll come back and talk a little bit more about that. But to kind of help ground us in thinking about, well, what is it businesses are actually doing? I'll turn it over here for a second to my partner, Danny, and he can describe a little bit, okay, what do we really mean when we say artificial intelligence?
Right, and thank you, Justin. And I'm sort of going with what Justin just said. Right, when I talk to my students about artificial intelligence, right, I typically start at the beginning. So typically, people trace back the origins to artificial intelligence, which was to what was deemed the Dartmouth Conference or the Dartmouth workshops in the 1950s, where a bunch of neuroscientists and computer scientists got together, and they were talking about, like all the possibilities of artificial intelligence, right? The reason I like to quote those guys, though, is not so much because of their ingenuity, and they were intellectual giants, but rather because of how wrong they were. In particular, in 1970s, Marvin Minsky, one of the computer scientists who was a member of that group, said that from 3 to 8 years, we will have a machine with the general intelligence of an average human being. Suffice to say, that has not come true, right? So the computer from which I'm talking to you right now, right, is not as smart as my 7-year-old, not by a landslide, right? And this point is really made very well by an article by Michael Jordan. Not that Michael Jordan, but the computer scientist Michael Jordan. He is a computer science from Berkeley who makes this point in this really nice article that I encourage you to read, laced with personal experiences, that people are somewhat confused about the meaning of artificial intelligence, that there's some kind of intelligent thought in computers competing with humans. And I think that's sort of what Marvin Minsky and those people back then had in mind. And we should highlight that we don't really have that. What we do have, right, is most of what is labeled today is actual machine learning. And machine learning refers to the much more simple task of finding patterns in data and making well-founded predictions, right? So going back to the examples that Justin just threw up, right? So the reason that we're able to do that, you can move on to the next slide, Justin. The reason that we're able to do this, if you think about these DALL-E applications, about the Netflix application, or about Alexa, is that there is a lot of data to go off from, right? And what computers and computer scientists have excelled at is teaching a computer to learn from past experiences. So if you have a lot of data to go off from, you think about Netflix, they have all these customers and they knew what they like to watch and what they rated highly, right? They have all this data from the past and they can say, well, you look much like these customers in the past, right? Because you have the same demographic information, you have the same watching history. Those customers really liked to watch this kind of show now, right? And that's what computers can tell you, hey, there's similarity between you right then and these customers in the past, and they're trying to exploit that, right? So this is what we mean by predictive modeling, right? That there's similarity in situation mapping to certain outcomes, and computers can increasingly do a range of complex tasks, right, by mimicking these past decisions, right? And in fact, that will become clear. Some of the most successful models are coined artificial neural networks, and this is also referred to as deep learning, and they really mimic the functioning of the human brain to get from signals to output. But what do we mean by a prediction model? Like for those of you who went a little too quickly for, right? It's helpful to think about, and we're introducing a little bit of mathematical notation here. It's helpful to think about two sets of pieces, namely a set of variables or features that explain a situation, right? In a Netflix example, this might be your viewing history, your age, demographic information, and a thing that you want to predict. What movie would that person likely be interested to watch in next, right? Does that make sense? So you have this pair of a set of features describing the situation and an outcome you want to predict. You need to have past information on that. So you need to have information on customers and what they liked and what they watched in the past. And you're trying to expand from that, to learn from that in order to predict what the next customer would likely be interested in to watch in the future. Justin, back over to you.
Yeah. So, as Danny was starting to say, think about the Netflix example, right? It's helpful to break it down a little. And so I'm going to go over this example, but as I do this, what we'd like you to all do is start thinking a little bit from your business experiences and the organizations you work for about predictions that might be useful to have. Where do you have patterns that might occur recurringly? Where it could be valuable to be able to predict, either for the purposes of scoring, like let's rank what you're likely to like the best or which product you're going to like, or for sort of forecasting, okay, how many people are going to purchase or how many people are going to do something. So start thinking about where in your business it might be valuable to have a prediction. And on the next slide, I'm going to ask everybody actually to start putting in some examples in the chat so that we can sort of enrich a little bit some of the examples we have here. As we think about Netflix, like their example, so they want to predict videos you're likely to want to watch. So they basically have this huge library of videos, but they can only show you on the home screen, if you see here, a limited set of videos. It's not like they can dump them all on you at once. That's not going to be user friendly. So they need to prioritize. There needs to be something at the top of the list. There needs to be something on the left. And they want that something to be most likely something you're actually going to watch. So they want to score their whole library and give each video a score for you based on the likelihood that you would actually watch that video at that moment. So to do that, what they need, and this was the key thing Danny stressed, and I think the key thing to think about in your organizations as you start potentially moving towards using AI, is that all of the power of AI rests on historical data and patterns that have played out in the past. Right now, artificial intelligence doesn't generate new ideas. It picks up historical patterns. And so you need that data. And so if we think about the Netflix example, they start out with a bunch of data. Every time somebody logs in to watch something on Netflix, that becomes an episode. And during that episode, when somebody sort of logs in, they open the Netflix app, what Netflix gets to see is which video, if any, did the person watch. Okay, so they can label all their videos, watched by the person and not. And at the same time, they're capturing a lot of information about the situation at that moment, these features, as Danny was calling them. And some of those features are features of the video. So the genre, the length, the rating, who the lead actors are, when it was made, a whole bunch of things. But they're also capturing features of the user. They know some things about age and gender, but maybe most importantly, previous videos that were watched. They know, okay, this person just logged in, they've watched these things in the past, and we can see patterns in the historical data of what do people watch next. And they use that then to make a score for each of these, make a prediction, and then that score is useful because it allows them to design their website to prioritize things that you're likely to need. So let's go ahead and open the chat, and we'd like everybody, try as best you can. Can you give us examples of where you could imagine other useful prediction models in business settings? Where's it helpful to have a score for something or a prediction for something? Amazon and Facebook use some variants. Yep. Facebook's prioritizing ads, right? Which ads should get shown to you. In fact, Facebook and Amazon and Google all monetize ads in that way. That's a really good example. Amazon, similarly, you put in a search and it's trying to figure out from your search and your past buying patterns, which things should they put at the top of the list, right? YouTube does some similar things, right? So YouTube's very similar to Netflix in that way. Anybody have some examples from an industry far away? Maybe I'll throw out one while you're coming up with some. So, for instance, take many of our businesses have an IT group that services problems people have with their computers. Increasingly, those IT systems are asking you to put in a service request, and when you type that service request, in the background, some companies are developing these prediction models that say, okay, based on the things you mentioned, what is likely going to be the fix, or which person are we likely going to need to call? And then they can prioritize and route the IT requests more efficiently because they have that prediction. Yep, similar patience to mine for treating complex cases, right? So there's a lot of use of prediction models. We also see the virtual ER front door. So a lot of use of prediction models in healthcare, where there's a bunch of rich data and there's a whole bunch of need to prioritize and to also not miss things, right? You can use systems that are going to predict, hey, which test should be run for a patient like this in case, a nurse or a doctor might miss a valuable test. You can see that in pharma and other things. Yep, number of good examples coming through in the chat on the medical side of things. Yep. Mike's talking about project scheduling, right? When is the store going to be most busy? And you can sort of think about a whole range of staffing applications and stocking and ordering situations, any sort of company that needs to keep themselves stocked. I see an example here. Steve's giving us examples of trucking and shipping industry, predicting mileage and other sort of problems. So we've got a really nice, rich set of examples in the chat here. And I hope what they do is give you a bit of a sense of just how powerful this sort of stuff is. Sometimes I think we, in creating this session and calling it demystifying artificial intelligence in business, what we wanted to do is sort of recognize that artificial intelligence is in some sense more banal and less magical than it sounds. I think often people think of this as like these amazing computers that have brilliant ideas, and we really don't have that, as Danny was saying. But what we do have actually in many businesses and organizations is places where if we could routinely and reliably pick up on patterns in historical data, we could make things a lot more efficient and effective for people. So in my last minute or so here before we open it to Q&A, we just want to highlight though that the important thing with thinking about this use of predictions and data is that you can't always get what you want. There are in particular two types of predictions where machine learning and advanced prediction models don't help. The first is when you're trying to think about how things will play out in a unique situation. Like if you want to know how quickly staffing levels will return to normal after we end COVID protocols, there's no historical data on that. There's no pattern to pick up on. So machine learning is not going to help. It also won't help if what you have is an investment problem. If you're thinking about making a change to your business practice, some investment in new technology or a new approach, that's also not something that a computer can reliably tell you from historical data because you haven't seen that change. Instead, you're going to need experiments there. The last thing here is that it is really important. There's a huge power to these things. There are also some really important limits and challenges, and we don't have time to get into those now. At the very end here, we're going to pitch. We've got a program that you can take through CPED with us, and we have a whole section in that program on these sort of pitfalls. But we'll sort of highlight maybe at a high level that the quality of the predictions you can make and the relevance of the predictions you make really depends on what sort of historical data you have, how reliable it is, whether it's biased, and how well it fits the situation you're trying to use it for making predictions. So with that, we've got a couple of minutes for Q&A here. I know this was a quick session. We really thank you all for coming. There's a couple of example articles we have here that we'd encourage people to read if you're looking for something a little deeper here, and I'll leave these up. But why don't we go ahead and open it up for questions? I think, Trinity, we're taking questions in the chat for the most part, or?
Yes. So, yep. Thank you so much. That was fantastic, Justin. Thanks, Danny. Please go ahead and put into the chat discussions any questions that you might have, and I'll quick check the Q&A to see if there's anything over there. I do see a question about predicting attrition. Which customers are most likely to drop the program or product?
I think that was an example in the context.
Yes. Yep, you're right. Okay.
That was by that was by Evgenia, and it was a really good example. So I got back to it.
I think you're right. Okay, I do have another question here. Do you expect that computers are going to take a lot of jobs and create a big disruption in the workforce?
Yeah. So I think that's, it's a really good question. One of those things I think a lot of people are worrying about. And I think a lot of, to some extent, nobody really knows the answer to that. But there is on the screen here, this first article I have listed here, What to Expect from Artificial Intelligence, I think has a really nice perspective on this. And I'd encourage you to Google that article if you're looking for more on this. But I think the high level thing is that AI is very likely to change work a lot. But it's not necessarily going to replace work. It's going to replace some types of task, and in particular, things that involve a lot of routine pass-through of information. So we see one thing, we know exactly what to do, and we pass that through. We make something happen. Those types of things don't really need to be done by humans. Machines can very reliably pick up on patterns of taking in information and responding in the way that people do, and they can be trained to mimic what people do. But which tasks to prioritize, what the judgments and values and desires of the organization are, how to monitor and how to set up these systems, all of that's going to create, important new work. And there are efficiencies being gained that really increase the value, and this article makes this point, to people who are making judgment calls. So, one thing to think about is that there are going to be shifts in the relative value. And so the value of being able to make a judgment call based on information is going to go up as we get more and more ability to feed into those sort of decisions.
Thank you so much for that, Justin. It's an interesting time we're in, right?
Yeah.
So thank you again, Justin and Danny. And before we end, like mentioned before by Justin, we do want to let you know of if you've enjoyed what we've talked about today here and you would like to further explore, we do have a new business analytics for data-driven leadership program. In this program, you will gain skills for asking better business questions and leading in ways that will allow the organization to generate more insight and more effective discussions. We'd love to see you in one of Justin and Danny's class this November at the Fluna Center in Madison. Thank you all so much for attending our webinar today.